Hey, I'm G, and welcome to the Stuff You Should Think About podcast, where I answer everyday questions about the phenomena and objects around you in quick, bite-sized episodes. I'll go get the answers because you don't have time to, and I bring them back in a way you can listen to on your break, on your way to work, on your way home, while you're cooking dinner, or during any little bit of free time you've got. Today's question: are Nazi criminals still free? Now, before we dive in, let me be super clear. I'm not a historian. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a war crimes investigator. I'm just someone who looked into something disturbing and complicated because it keeps popping up in headlines, in documentaries, even in family conversations. And I wanted to understand how it's even possible that decades after the end of the World War II, people accused of horrific acts tied to the Nazi regime might still be walking around free. And more importantly, how does the system allow that? So, I'm not here to accuse. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to break down how this situation works. The mechanics, the laws, the realities, because sometimes understanding how something happens is more important than just asking if it happened. Let's get into it. Part 1. What do we mean by Nazi criminal? First, we need to define our terms. When people say Nazi criminal, they usually mean someone who participated in war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide during the Holocaust. That could mean a camp guard at Auschwitz, Treblinka, or Sobibor, a bureaucrat who helped organize deportations, a doctor who conducted medical experiments, or even a civilian who turned in neighbors to authorities for persecution. But legally, it's not enough to suspect someone was involved. There has to be evidence, and that's where it gets complicated, because we're talking about events that happened over 75 years ago. Most of the people directly involved are now well into their 90s or have already passed away, which means prosecutors, judges, and investigators are working from fragmented records. Witness testimony from survivors, many of whom are also aging, and documents that were sometimes destroyed on purpose. But here's the key. Just because someone might have been involved doesn't mean they've been convicted. And just because they were in Germany during the war doesn't mean they were complicit. That's where the legal system steps in, and it's designed to err on the side of caution. Part 2. How are Nazi crimes prosecuted today? Let's talk mechanics. How the system actually works. In most countries, including the United States and Germany, prosecuting someone for a Nazi-era crime is incredibly difficult. Why? Because we're dealing with 3 big hurdles. One is jurisdiction, who has the right to try them. 2 is evidence, can you prove individual guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? And 3 is the statute of limitations. Are there time limits on prosecution? Let's take them one at a time. Jurisdiction, who's in charge? In the U.S., Nazi prosecutions fall under a law called the Justice for Uncompensated Survivors. Today, it's called the Just Act. And the Department of Justice has a special unit, the Human Rights and Special Prosecutions Section, that handles these cases. But here's the catch. The U.S. can't prosecute someone just for being a Nazi. It can only prosecute someone if they entered the U.S. under false pretenses, like hiding their past affiliation or involvement in persecution. So, most U.S. cases aren't criminal trials for murder. They're denaturalization and deportation hearings, civil cases to revoke citizenship and remove someone from the country. For example, in 2021, a man named Baldwin Lindet was ordered deported from the U.S. after evidence showed he was an SS guard at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. He was put in prison. He wasn't put in prison. He was stripped of citizenship and removed. Germany, on the other hand, can prosecute for war crimes directly, but they didn't always. For decades, German courts required proof that someone committed a specific act of violence, like pulling a trigger or beating someone to death. That meant low-level guards or clerks often went free because they could say, "I was just following orders." But in 2011, a landmark case changed that. A former Sobibor guard named John Jemanjuk was convicted not because there was proof he personally killed anyone, but because he aided and abetted murder simply by serving as a guard at a death camp. The court ruled that being part of the machinery of the genocide was enough. This opened the door for more prosecutions, even for people in their 90s. Since then, German prosecutors have reopened dozens of investigations. In 2022, a 101-year-old woman who worked as a secretary at a concentration camp was charged with aiding and abetting murder. Her trial is pending. So, yes, some people who worked in Nazi institutions are still alive, and yes, some are technically free, but the system is trying, however slowly, to catch up. Part 3, the legal foundations. Why this is so hard. Now, let's talk about the legal bedrock, because that's where the neutrality comes in. This isn't about politics, it's about law. Two big principles guide how democracies handle these cases. One is the rule of law, and the next one is due process and the presumption of innocence. These are not partisan ideas. They're foundational to both sides of the political aisle in countries like the U.S. and Germany. Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and progressives, they all agree. You can't punish someone without evidence. You can't convict based on suspicion. And that's where the First Amendment comes in. Not in the way you might think. Wait, free speech? In a podcast about Nazi war criminals? Yes, because even in the U.S., the First Amendment protects even the most vile ideologies unless they cross into incitement. The Supreme Court ruled in Brandenburg v. Ohio in 1969 that speech can only be restricted if it's directed to inciting imminent lawless action and is likely to produce it. So, someone can be a Nazi sympathizer, wear a swastika, even praise Hitler, and still be protected under the First Amendment. But that's separate from being a perpetrator of crimes. The key point: laws about war crimes and denaturalization are built on evidence, not beliefs. And the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly across administrations and political shifts that citizenship can be revoked if it was obtained through fraud. In Fedorenko versus United States in 1981, the court ruled 7-2 that a man who lied about being a guard at Treblinka could lose his citizenship. Hiding your role in Nazi persecution is grounds for removal. This was a bipartisan decision. The justices spanned the ideological spectrum. The government attorneys who pursued the case came from both Democratic and Republican administrators. So, this isn't about left versus right. It's about law versus lawlessness. Part 4. Historical parallels. How have we handled similar cases before? Let's zoom out. After World War II, the Allies held the Nuremberg trials, prosecuting top Nazi leaders for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. It was unprecedented. But even then, not everyone was tried. Millions were involved in the Nazi regime, and only a fraction faced justice. Then, in the 1960s, West Germany held the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, prosecuting lower-level camp personnel. Again, limited success. Many defendants received light sentences or were acquitted due to lack of evidence. Fast forward to the 1900s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we saw another wave of accountability, not for Nazis, but for Bosnian war criminals. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, prosecuted people in their 60s and 70s for crimes committed in the 1900s. And they did it using the same legal theory, aiding and abetting genocide. That precedent helped modern prosecutors argue that even nonviolent participants like radio propagandists or local officials could be held accountable. So, the mechanics are similar. Distant crimes, aging defendants, fragmented evidence, but a commitment to due process. It's not perfect, but it's lawful. Part 5. Part 5. So why aren't more people in jail? Let's be honest. This is the heart of the question. We're 80 years past the fall of the Third Reich. The Holocaust claimed 6 million Jewish lives, plus millions more. Roma, disabled people, LGBTQ, individuals, political descendants. And yet, we're talking about perhaps a handful of remaining suspects. Why? Because time has been the greatest obstacle. Witnesses die. Documents are lost. Memories fade. Defendants are frail. And in democratic legal systems, you can't try someone who's too ill to stand trial. Courts prioritize fairness, even for the accused. Take the case of Irmgard Furchner, a former Nazi secretary. In 2022, a German court convicted her of aiding and abetting murder, but suspended her sentence because she was 97 and deemed to pose no threat. Is that justice? I'll be honest, I don't know. And that's okay. I have a personal bias. I believe accountability matters, even late. But I also believe rushing to judgment or punishing people without due process undermines the very ideals we're trying to defend. So while part of me wants to say, lock them up no matter what, the other part remembers that's how authoritarianism starts. Part 6. What are the solutions? Let's talk about options. Because there's more than one way to achieve justice. The first one is continue criminal prosecutions. Keep investigating and prosecuting while survivors are still alive to testify. Germany's Central Office of State Justice is still active, tracking down anyone with verifiable ties. The next one is expand civil accountability. Instead of jail, pursue symbolic justice, public trials, civil fines, or forced restitution. Think of it as historical reckoning, not just punishment. The next one is support survivor testimony and education. Fund Holocaust education, record survivor stories, make sure the system remembers, even if individuals escape punishment. The next one is international cooperation. Countries can share intelligence, declassify documents, and streamline extradition. The U.S., Germany, Israel, and others already collaborate, but it could be faster. Lower the burden of proof, but carefully. Some argue that serving at a death camp should be enough for conviction, regardless of specific acts, but that risks guilt by association, a dangerous precedent. No single solution is perfect, but the goal, acknowledgement and accountability, is shared across political lines. And that's the surprising thing. This isn't a left or a right issue, it's a civil one. I'll admit something personal here. When I started researching this episode, I was a little angry. How is it possible that someone who helped run a death camp could live freely in America? It felt wrong. But the more I learned, the less simple it seemed. Yes, there are failures, missed opportunities, bureaucratic delays, cases dropped on technicalities, but there's also a system flawed, slow, and perfect that tries to balance justice with fairness, and that system is still working. It may feel like too little, too late, but consider this. The fact that we're still trying matters. The fact that a 100-year-old can still face a court, that's a statement. It says your actions have consequences even after 80 years. And maybe that's the point. Not every question has a clean answer, but thinking about it, that's where responsibility begins. That's it for this episode of Stuff You Should Think About. A huge thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. Download and leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on this episode or suggest a phenomenon or object you'd like discussed in the future on whatever platform you're listening. Until next time, stay curious. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Statements are based on current scientific understanding, historical records, and public policy.